And thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for a very interesting day today. It was such a privilege and very, very stimulating to listen to all the projects. And it really, I think, for Vegard and me, it was very eye-opening, all of them very relevant and addressing very important issues in Slovak society. And thank you to Jan and to Peter and their teams for organizing this fantastic day. I know it's the end of the day, so I'm going to try to go as quickly as I can through my presentation. And what I just wanted to do is to give a flavor for the context for the Slovak NGO programs. So I'll just give a brief overview of the NGO programs across the region outside of Slovakia, some of the results of those programs outside Slovakia, and some of the lessons that can be drawn from the experience in this financial mechanism. So, what are the NGO programs? Well, you know what they are. It's the donors' contribution to civil society in 16 countries. So these are the countries. This circle, you probably can't see the country names, but this is the total allocation, about 160 million euros, which is divided between 16 countries in Northern, Central, and Southern Europe. During this funding period. And the program sizes vary, from tiny programs such as in Malta to very large programs such as in Hungary Hungary is not the largest, but in Poland, Romania. The objective, they all share a common goal, which is to strengthen civil society development and to enhance its contribution to social justice, democracy, and sustainable development. And right now, there are nearly 3,000 NGO projects across this region, of which approximately 150 in Slovakia. These are our partners in the beneficiary countries who are implementing the programs. So we have the full list, and as you see, Ecopolis Consortium and Open Society Foundation there. A brief reminder, I think the ambassador spoke very eloquently this morning about the reasons why the donors support civil society in these countries. But clearly the main reason is to support, because the donors believe this is a core, civil society is a core aspect of a healthy democracy. And also because we're in a challenging context where there are several core problems with governance and with democracy, where there's a shortage of funding for such initiatives, such civil society across the region, and where society is facing new and emerging challenges, such as the arrival of refugees in Europe. Is this funding really needed? Well, I think you saw today how every euro is put to very, very good use by civil society. And two indicators that we can mention of this on a regional level are that about 21,000 applications were submitted by NGOs across Europe for this funding. So on average, that was around 6 times more applications than funding was actually awarded. But that was an average figure, and you had rates such as 19 times as many applications as grants awarded in countries such as Slovenia, Poland, also very high, Lithuania. I see our colleague from the Lithuanian operators here today, and they had to process an enormous number of applications. And what that really means is very high demand and a very competitive environment. And a second indicator of this high demand is that the projected rate of spending for the NGO programs as a whole is around 95% by the end of the program period. So we see that, I mean, civil society really competes for this funding and only the best projects are selected. A few achievements, I think we can highlight some of the work that we heard about this afternoon on empowerment and inclusion of vulnerable groups. You see there that across the region there were around 820 projects in this area promoting social inclusion. And of that, around 426 with an aspect of Roma inclusion. That represented around just over 17% of the funding for Slovakia, which compares very well with the region. I think in the Czech Republic, around 13% of the funding, project funding, went to projects with a focus on Roma inclusion. So very good targeting of the funds there. And some of the results, well, around 160,000 people from vulnerable groups across the region are now receiving better access to welfare and services thanks to the programs. So that means they have better access to psychosocial support, citizenship training, advocacy and legal assistance, and so on. And in addition, around 6.5 million euro has been allocated to projects trying to support asylum seekers and refugees, the initial reception and integration of asylum seekers and refugees. And several operators have been particularly active in responding to this issue, among which the Open Society Foundation. An example, you heard so many examples this afternoon, so I'll just go very quickly through this. But this is a project supported by the NGO program in Greece, where, as you know, 700,000 refugees entered Europe via Greece. And among the most vulnerable of those are, of course, unaccompanied children who lost their parents along the way. And this project set up a network of guardians to accompany those children, help them to understand their legal rights, help them with reunification of their family members, accessing medical care, and so on. And this is a picture of Christina Dimakou, who's a lawyer from Athens. All of these guardians have their professional lives. They do this in their voluntary time. And she's a guardian to about 4 refugee children. The project also advocated vis-à-vis the government in Greece for a clarification of the legal status of guardians and raised awareness within Greek society of the particular needs that unaccompanied minors, refugee children have, and that should be addressed. And the project, like many other of the NGO projects we heard of today, had a Norwegian partner. The NGO called Verantwoordingen Volksvennen. I don't know if I can pronounce that very well. But this is an NGO in Norway that developed a model for guardianship and that cooperated with Metaction, the Greek NGO, to develop this model in Greece, which has now been adopted by the state as a way to provide social protection to unaccompanied minors. A second area of achievement that we can really note from today's presentations as well is in the area of democratic values and human rights. And there we see around 25 million euro was allocated to projects in this area across the region, and that generated around 600 projects. Some of the results that can be mentioned include, well, nearly 17,000 people benefiting from human rights support, and around 47 human rights campaign sensitizing the public and decision makers to human rights issues. And many of those, I think the vast majority of them, were actually in the Lithuanian program, my colleague here. So I think an example, we'll mention this very quickly, but this is a project in Lithuania to develop protection for whistleblowers. Lithuania had no mechanism to protect those who report on corruption. A law was proposed in 2010, and it has been stalled ever since. And so, supported by this project, Transparency International in Lithuania engaged in a campaign and a partnership with Transparency International in Norway to participate in developing the legal and policy framework on the protection of whistleblowers. So, yeah, very nice project in this area, and that NGO has now participated in the preparation of legislative proposals. I'll go quite quickly through the rest, because I think this could take a while, but this is a very central part of the programs, is engaging citizens at a local and a national level in participating in decision making. Around 23 million has been invested in this area, yielding around 500 projects that are engaging citizens in issues of local and national importance. Also, the advocacy and watchdog role of civil society has been strengthened through the programs. Some of the results that we can see include about 1,500 advocacy and watchdog NGOs supported across the region, and around 177 laws or practices have been improved or changed in line with NGO advocacy, including many in Slovakia. This is an example from the Romanian NGO program. This was an NGO called the Center for Legal Resources, and they sought to give effect to an EU directive that mentions the right of NGOs to use confiscated assets that have been confiscated from, seized from, that have been ill-gotten, so corruption leading to assets, and then they are seized by the state. And the law gives NGOs the right to use these up to 15%. So this NGO in Romania conducted a campaign together with a coalition of NGOs, made a proposal to the parliament, and this parliament has now, the Romanian parliament adopted their proposal. So now Romanian NGOs can receive 15% of confiscated assets and use them for social projects. Capacity building, as we've heard today, is a very key part of the NGO programs. I mean, the overall objective is strengthen civil society capacity, and much of the focus has been on building the sustainability and capacity of the organizations themselves and of the sector as a whole. About 16 million euro has been invested in this area, and you can distinguish between the capacity building at the level of individual NGOs and project promoters, but then also many projects that have tried to build networks across the sector, coalitions and so on, and then of course the regional exchange, which has a strong element of building capacity, exchanging best practices across the region. There have been some very, very impressive results here, and I'll just, since my Hungarian colleague is here, I'll highlight one of the projects from the Hungarian program called Civic City, which I think is a very nice project. It aimed to help NGOs and community groups and social enterprises to access empty urban spaces in Budapest. So we see the project promoter, which is this Hungarian Contemporary Architecture Center, KEK it's called. They worked with their partners in Hungary, the municipality of Budapest and the Social Innovation Agency. And then they also worked with a Norwegian organization, the Oslo School of Architecture and Design. And what they did was they identified organizations, social enterprises, NGOs in Budapest and Hungary who needed access to office space and meeting space. And they matched them with available empty urban spaces. So every city has fantastic real estate that isn't being used very well, and they researched the legal status of these spaces and developed a kind of model contract for the temporary use of these empty spaces for social organizations. And then they mentored these organizations to help them develop an organizational strategy. And the result of this is that now many of these organizations have access to great office space for an affordable rent. And the municipality of Budapest has kind of integrated this model contract into their urban development plans and their funding schemes. So very nice project, I think. Finally, in the area of sustainable development, this is also part of a core part of the objective of the Ngo program, to strengthen the capacity of civil society to contribute to sustainable development. And we've seen in Slovakia there's a particular focus on this area. And I think some of the results there, well, we've had a lot of citizen engagement, so 45,000 citizens across the region now engaged in projects promoting sustainable development, and many people involved in environmental education activities, teachers trained in environmental education, and so on. Some lessons and challenges that we can draw from this period. Firstly, I mean, we know that these activities, this building capacity of civil society is something that takes a very long time, takes a lot of resources, and it's very difficult to squeeze that into a short project implementation period. It's difficult for the project promoters, and it's very difficult for the operators. So I think both parties feel kind of squeezed by the short time frame for the programs, and that's really something I think everybody's aware of and working towards a longer implementation period. Secondly, we definitely see that smaller organizations, especially rural organizations, community-based organizations, need support at the beginning to develop their project ideas, as well as during implementation. So, you know, they may have a focus on just getting by every day, meeting their immediate needs, and there's a need for support to help them really to think more long-term and think of developing their organizational capacity. Thirdly, at the sectoral level as well, building capacity across the sector also needs a lot of careful planning and thinking about what does that really mean. I think we had the experience that open calls weren't always the best instrument for identifying projects that could help the sector to develop as a whole. And this is something we definitely want to learn from this period. Fourthly, advocacy skills. We've seen today, I was really impressed by how every single project had an advocacy and a policy engagement aspect. But we know that it's very difficult for rural organizations and small organizations to have the contacts and the networks to engage and make recommendations on policy. So that's something we'd also like to strengthen. How to measure and report on capacity development is obviously a big challenge. Cross-sectoral partnerships with local governments and with the private sector, that's also something we would like to strengthen in future. And finally, creating networks and coalitions is something we'd also like to strengthen in future, and that was perhaps not sufficiently prioritized from our side and sometimes from the program side during this period. And so that points to some areas that we would like to improve in future with the input from, I mean, this is based on the input of the operators, from project promoters, from various evaluation processes. But the first, I think, is that we would like to be able to provide more long-term strategic grants so that organizations don't have to focus on the implementation of a specific project, but can really invest in their organizational development. We'd like to be a little more flexible on our side with the grants that we give, so that project promoters are able to respond quickly to emerging issues and needs, and that the grants aren't just a one-size-fits-all approach. Like I mentioned, we'd like to increase our outreach to rural areas. In some programs, we saw quite a concentration in the capital city, often for very good reasons, such as, organizations with a national reach are based in capital cities very often. But we do want to, since the objectives of the grants is to reduce economic and social disparities, we want to emphasize that going forward. On a sectoral level, I mentioned that we want to increase the policy engagement, especially of these rural NGOs, more focus on income diversification and different ways of generating financial sustainability, whether it's social entrepreneurship, leveraging private sector resources, and so on. But this is something we really see as critical to reducing dependence on grants and building long-term capacity. Greater emphasis on partnerships. This was something, we had actually some budget earmarked for cross-sectoral partnerships, and there was the lowest demand of all the sort of outcomes, we called them. That was the one that was least popular, and I think because it's quite a challenge, and so we'd like to figure out how to improve that in future. And finally, we'd like to also enable the operators to play a more strategic role in shaping the programs, and not, which was sometimes the case in this mechanism, not be sort of so focused on procedures and rubber stamping what external experts say and so on. So I think that's all for today. Thank you again very much. Thanks.